removal proceedings. They were apprehended at the southern border by Customs and Border Protection. I gave you the data as of the end of July, 62,000 children apprehended since October of 2013. The federal government's fiscal year ends September 30. The projection for this year was 90,000. I don't think they're going to make it. I think it's going to be something more like 70,000 child apprehensions. On the bottom part of the screen, you can see the three largest sending countries: El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Ecuador is the fourth, but we've also seen children from India, the Punjab region, from Pakistan, and from Haiti. Also a little bit from the Dominican Republic. These numbers have dropped in August. It was 400 children a day. In June, it's down to about 100 a day right now. This is a map taken from the New York Times. Thank you, New York Times, for the courtesy of allowing us to use this. This shows you the cities, the regions in these three sending countries where the majority of the children arriving in the last 6 months have come. When we're working on these cases, knowing the context and places these children have come from, some truly are indigenous Indian people, Mayan descent people, who come from remote villages, from mountainous areas, from farming communities, and really have had very little education and may not have ever been to a big city like New York before. Others come from very congested urban areas, and they're fleeing because of violence, domestic violence, sexual abuse, or gang violence in their community. Sometimes you're going to hear me in this presentation talk negatively about Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Please forgive me for being general. Certainly there are excellent people in all of these countries, but the data shows by objective reporting by our own government and others and by the UN that many of these nations are unable to protect their children. This shows a link between high rates of homicide in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala and the increase in children coming. These three countries are in the top 5 most dangerous countries in the world. Think about that for a minute. You may say to yourself, I don't know much about this region. I do not know why our media, at least our English language media, has not been paying as much attention to the collapse of society in these three sending countries. And this graph also is very helpful to show you the increase in the number of children over a period of years. Notice Mexico in turquoise at the bottom of the graph. Most of the children from Mexico are apprehended and returned immediately into Mexico. Children arriving from Canada are returned to Canada. That's under international agreement with them. A bill did pass Congress this summer that would similarly treat children from these three sending Central American countries, but the Senate refused to entertain the legislation, and it's very unlikely it will pass. I think that was not well thought out, and I believe the administration is against it, as are a significant number of members of Congress in the Republican Party as well. Again, an increase in showing you how many more children have arrived. The uptick really began in about 2011. Safe Passage Project workload exploded in 2012. We thought, how can we handle 20 cases a month? Now we're getting 30 to 50 cases a week. New York is the second largest recipient of the children released to out of detention, apprehended at the Texas or California border. Texas is number 1. Florida, I think you're number 4, right after California, but it's close. These are just the numbers counted in the last 6 months. Why does New York have so many people? Well, it's because most of these children are being released to extended family members living within our region. So we're talking about El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. We have populations of those people throughout our state, also in Massachusetts, also in other parts of the country. This map should help you identify your office. Chicago, I know you're here on the line. You have these children as well. You also have a large number of children from China in Chicago. We're going to talk now about the process. Federal agencies who. This is just a big overview because if we really put all the images on the slide, you'd be overwhelmed. We have the Department of Homeland Security, created in 2002. It is a multi-divisional agency. For example, you may not know the Secret Service is part of the Department of Homeland Security. ICE, you've certainly heard of. Department of Justice used to run this function for our government. They controlled the borders and controlled immigration. In 2002, it was divided. Department of Justice continues to serve a role. They run the immigration court. Department of Health and Human Services is responsible for the care and custody of the children when they're in federal detention. Looking down, on our slide's a little bit difficult to read, but under the Department of Homeland Security, you see Border and Customs Protection, ICE, and USCIS. That stands for United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. Those are 3 sub-agencies, each with their own general counsel, each with their own regulations, each with their own policies. All 3 will touch the lives of these children. EOIR, some people say EOR. I like to say EOIR because I don't want to offend Winnie the Pooh. EOR is the name of our court, Executive Office of Immigration Review. There are judges that sit on the bench, but they're not Article 3 judges. They're not elected judges. They don't serve for their life. They are advanced civil servants. Office of Refugee Resettlement is the name of the agency that actually takes these kids into detention. It has nothing to do with being a refugee, and it has nothing to do with resettlement. It's just the formal name of the group that had some experience with housing the children who came from Africa. You've heard of the Lost Boys of Sudan. So when Congress was looking for a federal agency who, as child migrants began to arrive in more numbers, this is the group they chose. But please don't be confused when you see paperwork that says refugee resettlement. These children have not been designated as refugees. Underneath USCIS, you see the Asylum Office. It's a special division with its own leadership, its own manuals, its own training, its own independent hiring. There are 2 offices we'll see here in our New York region. They have offices throughout the country. Not every location has an office. Anaheim happens to be California's, for example. If you're having a case in Connecticut, your case is actually going to be heard in Newark. The Boston Asylum Office is reopening soon. So one of the things we do with Safe Passage is help you navigate all of these different agencies, knowing where to file, when to file, who's the boss. We just put Immigration Court for EOIR, and then there's a division within our Children's Services. What is the method? Apprehension is by DHS, usually by Border and Custom Protection, immediately turned over to officials at ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. You saw the images this summer. They were overwhelmed. They put children in Air Force bases, in makeshift FEMA facilities. FEMA is also a division of DHS. They were detained then officially by Office of Refugee Resettlement, Division of Child Services. Usually within 7 days, they were released to, quote, a sponsor. A sponsor is not a legal term. It is not an obligatory term. It is not a definition of a guardianship, a foster care relationship, a custodian. It is literally something the federal government made up. They do ask the sponsor to sign a document that says they will be responsible for the young person's care, and they do some shallow vetting of the quality of the sponsor, such as a fingerprint and background check. They do a change of venue if they've started the case already in Texas to the child's location here in New York, or perhaps in Florida, or in Connecticut. Again, we will help you through all the navigation. Sometimes on our slides, you'll see the name of Wendy Walagala. She's an attorney here in New York. She works with Kids in Need of Defense, another nonprofit organization that assists, and we always like to give credit for excellent slides.